Hello, everyone. Sorry I'm not there tonight, but tonight, as you spend some time together, I want you to do something we've done before in this series. I want you to take time and look back. Not because we're trying to repeat everything we've already heard, but because sometimes we move through life so quickly that we hear something on Sunday, and by Monday afternoon, life has already gotten loud again. And sometimes we need to stop and ask ourselves, what has God been trying to show me? Because over the first 3 weeks of Giants, Mountains, and Chains, we've talked about three things that every one of us faces: mountains, giants, and chains, or lies. And why those sound like three completely different things, I think they're much more connected than we realize. Because sometimes the mountain is what happens to us, the giant is what happens around us, and the chains is what, or the lies is what begins happening inside of us because of that. Think about it. Something happens we never planned for. A relationship changes, a diagnosis comes, a job disappears, money gets tight, a door closes, life suddenly looks nothing like we thought it would. And there it is, the mountain. And one of the first questions we tend to ask is, God, where are you? Why did you let this happen to me? Did I do something wrong? Have you forgotten me? But in that first week, we never discovered something important that I hope you haven't forgotten: that the mountain in front of you is not evidence that God has abandoned you. Jesus never promised a mountain free life. He promised, though, that he would be with us in the middle of it. Isaiah 43:2 says, when you pass through the waters, I will be with you. Notice what it says. It doesn't say if, it says when you pass through the waters. That week, we kept coming back to the simple truth that the message isn't that we need a bigger faith. The message is that we have a bigger God, a mustard seed faith in a mountain moving God. But then something happens when the mountain doesn't move immediately. Fear starts talking. Suddenly, we're just not dealing with the mountain anymore. Now we're facing a giant. That brought us to the story of David and Goliath. Everyone in Israel saw the same giant. They heard the same threats. They stood in the same valley, but they didn't all see the situation the same way. The army looked at Goliath and thought, he's too big. David looked at Goliath and thought, my God is bigger. It's the same giant, a different perspective. And that's when we discovered another truth: that fear exaggerates obstacles and starts to minimize God. Fear says things like, what if you fail? Or what if it gets worse? What if you lose everything? What if you never recover? What if nothing ever changes? And the problem with that is that if fear talks long enough, eventually fear starts producing lies. And that took us into the third week. Because the giant doesn't always have to knock you down. Sometimes it just has to convince you of something that isn't true. Maybe the mountain was rejection. And if so, fear says, what if nobody wants you? And eventually the lie becomes, no one will ever love you. Maybe the mountain was failure. Well, fear speaks up and says, what if you fail again? And eventually the lie we hear is, I am a failure. Maybe the mountain was something from your past. Fear speaks up and says, what if people find out about that? And eventually the lie becomes, God could never, ever forgive someone like me. Do you see how they connect? The mountain says, this is impossible. Fear says, you're never going to make it. And the lie that we start to hear is, you're probably not enough anyways. And if we aren't careful, we begin building our lives around the very things that are lies, the things that God never said. That's why Jesus says in John 8:32 that you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. Because sometimes the greatest freedom we need isn't a change in our circumstances. It's discovering that something we've believed for years was never, ever true. And I want you to think about something for a moment. Have you ever walked through a dark room at night and seen something out of the corner of your eye? For just a second, your heart starts racing. You're convinced someone is standing there. Then you turn on the light, and it's just simply a coat hanging over a chair. The coat didn't change when the light came on. You just finally saw it clearly. That's what truth does. Truth turns on the light, and suddenly we begin seeing the mountain differently. We begin seeing the giant differently. And most importantly, maybe, we begin seeing ourselves differently. So before we move any further today, I want us to stop and think about these first 3 weeks because this isn't just about remembering 3 sermons. It's about asking, what has God been showing you? Maybe you're still standing in front of a mountain. Maybe there's a giant that keeps shouting. Maybe there's a lie you've believed for so long that it feels like truth. Whatever it is, don't hide it. Name it. Because God isn't asking you to pretend the mountain isn't real. He's asking you to remember that He is bigger. He's not asking you to pretend that you're never afraid. He's asking you to trust Him in the presence of that fear. And He's not asking you to somehow overpower every lie with your own strength. He's inviting you to replace the lie with His truth. Because remember, the mountain is not evidence that God has abandoned you. The giant is not bigger than God, and the lie doesn't get to define you. So now we're going to spend a few minutes talking together, and I want you to be honest. Nobody needs the perfect church answer. Nobody needs to fix anybody. Listen to one another, encourage one another, and maybe allow God to show you something you've been too busy to see. Because sometimes the beginning of freedom is simply being willing to say, "This is where I am," and then allowing God to meet us there. See you in a few minutes.